The first thing Sergeant Caleb Morgan noticed when he came home from deployment was that his front door was unlocked. The second thing he noticed was the woman standing in his kitchen, smiling through tears, as if she had been waiting years for him. Caleb froze on the porch, one hand still gripping the strap of his duffel bag, his heart pounding harder than it ever had under enemy fire. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times while serving overseas. The warm hug, the familiar voice, the feeling of finally being home. But the woman in front of him was a stranger. She was beautiful, blonde, and probably in her late 20s, wearing a lavender blouse, with a long braid hanging over one shoulder. One hand rested against her chest, while the other held an envelope. On the kitchen table sat a framed photograph of two young women Caleb didn't recognize. His stomach tightened. He slowly stepped inside, wondering if he had walked into the wrong house. Then, the woman looked directly into his eyes and whispered the words that would break his heart. "Caleb, don't you recognize me? If you believe people deserve kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes, the people who look like strangers are carrying pieces of our hearts we forgot we had." Caleb had spent 14 months stationed overseas, surviving long nights, exhausting patrols, and the constant fear that one phone call could change everything. Back home in Ohio, his daughter, Abigail, had grown up without him. When Caleb left, she had been only 8 years old, a little girl who used to run down the driveway whenever she heard his truck. Her mother, Rebecca, had struggled after their divorce, and Caleb had made the painful decision to let Abigail stay with her while he served. He promised his little girl that every deployment would end with him coming home. But life had a cruel way of stretching promises. There had been missed birthdays, late-night video calls interrupted by poor connections, packages that arrived weeks late, and photographs of a child becoming a teenager through a tiny screen. Caleb kept every picture she sent him inside the pocket of his uniform. He knew her face, her laugh, her favorite songs. At least he thought he did. When Caleb finally returned to Ohio, he received terrible news. Rebecca had died unexpectedly several months earlier after a sudden illness. Caleb had been notified while overseas, but the mission had prevented him from returning immediately. Rebecca's sister, Margaret, had told him that Abigail was staying with relatives and would be safe until he came home. Caleb spent his final weeks counting the days until he could finally hold his daughter. But now, standing in the kitchen, he couldn't understand why this unfamiliar woman was in his house. The woman slowly placed the envelope on the table. Her hands were trembling. She told him that her name was Abigail Morgan. Caleb stared at her, as though the words were spoken in another language. He looked at the photograph again. Suddenly, the pieces began to move. The little girl in the old pictures had the same blue eyes. The same tiny crease appeared beside her left eye when she smiled. The same habit of tilting her head when she was nervous was there in the woman standing before him, but Caleb couldn't make his mind accept it. The last time he had seen his daughter in person, she had been wearing a pink backpack and missing one of her front teeth. The woman before him was grown. Abigail stepped closer and told him she had been afraid he wouldn't know her. She had spent months imagining their reunion, but after her mother died, everything had changed. She had moved into Caleb's house because it was the only place that still felt connected to both of them. She had cleaned the kitchen, repaired the broken cabinet door, planted flowers by the window, and placed their family photographs around the house. She said she wanted to surprise him, but she never imagined the surprise would be seeing confusion in her father's eyes. Caleb lowered his head, ashamed. He admitted that he had spent so much time worrying about surviving that he hadn't realized his little girl was surviving too. He had missed the transformation. He had missed the braces, the school dances, the awkward teenage years, the first heartbreak, the nights she cried after losing her mother. He had thought being a father meant protecting her from danger. But Abigail had needed something much simpler. She had needed him to be there. Then Abigail handed him the envelope. Inside were dozens of letters she had written during his deployment, but never sent. She explained that she often wrote them when she was angry, because it was easier to put her feelings on paper than tell him over the phone. Caleb opened one and read that she had once waited by the window for 3 hours, because he had promised to call. Another said she had passed her driving test and wished he could have been sitting beside her. Another simply said, "Dad, I don't know if you remember what my voice sounds like, but I still remember yours." Caleb couldn't keep his composure. The decorated soldier who had endured explosions, freezing nights, and months of loneliness broke down beside his own kitchen table. Abigail wrapped her arms around him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. There was no perfect speech that could erase 14 years of missed moments. There was no apology powerful enough to give them back. But there was something they still had. They had tomorrow. That evening, Caleb and Abigail sat together on the back porch as the sun disappeared over the quiet Ohio neighborhood. She told him about her dreams of becoming a nurse. He told her about the places he had seen and the people he had lost. They laughed when they discovered that they both hated black coffee and loved old country songs. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel like a soldier waiting for his next mission. He felt like a father coming home. Months later, the house looked different. The military bags were gone from the hallway, replaced by Abigail's nursing textbooks. The old kitchen table became their favorite place to eat breakfast. The framed photograph that had once confused Caleb now sat in the center of the room. It showed Abigail at 8 years old beside the father she barely remembered, smiling beneath a summer sky. Beside it was a new photograph of them together, older, imperfect, but finally standing side by side. Caleb eventually understood something deployment had never taught him. Coming home wasn't always about walking through your own front door. Sometimes coming home meant recognizing the people life had changed while you were away. Sometimes it meant admitting you had missed things, accepting forgiveness, and choosing not to miss anything else. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a reminder that it is never too late to come home, and never too late to rebuild a broken bond. Before the story ends, comment, "There is always time to come home," if you believe forgiveness can heal even the deepest distance. That night, Caleb stood quietly in the hallway and looked at the photograph of his daughter as a little girl. Then, he looked toward the living room, where Abigail had fallen asleep on the couch, with a nursing textbook resting on her chest. He smiled through tears. For 14 years, he had believed his greatest victory was making it home alive. Now, he knew better. His greatest victory was finally being recognized by the daughter who had never stopped recognizing him.